we have to be careful about any metaphor. And by the way, interwoven, intertwined, it's a metaphor. It is not a theoretical explanation. Theoretical explanations begin at the point where you say, what are the limits of this metaphor? Why are the limits of that metaphor there? On the one hand, Vygotsky very clearly says, neoformations are new formations. They're new. They're new. They're unprecedented. They're unique. They're not there in development before. And that's what makes development develop. And on the other hand, he says they are the culmination of some line of development. So they're not completely new, obviously, because they're there in the line of development as well. Not only that, the line of development actually used to be, in the previous period, it used to be a peripheral line of development. So for example, he says this, that in infancy, speech is not a major line of development. There's a lot going on in infancy, but it ain't speech. And then in early childhood, speech does become a major line of development. And then in school age, it isn't, because thinking and intellectualization becomes the main line of development. Now, at this point, I'm having trouble, because on the one hand, the neoformations are completely new. And on the other hand, they're tied to these lines of development, which are really very old, and they go twisty. So how do I make sense of this? And the way I made sense of it was to say that, first of all, development itself develops, lines, the various threads that we find, for example, in speech, the phonology thread, the lexico-grammatical thread, various threads of semantics. And I would say that semantics is more than one thread, because there's clearly an interpersonal thread. There's clearly also an ideational thread. There's also some kind of textual thread. Politeness is one thing in our materials. Describing the physical system is another thing. Those are different threads of semantics, and they have to be handled slightly differently. But they're all braided together somehow and interwoven. I did say that in addition to intertwining and in addition to interweaving, there has to be splicing. And that's because lines of development break, and they have to be tied up again. And you can really see this in critical periods, that the line of development of imitation, for example, gets broken. And the line of development of the urvir, the sort of the shared we that the child had, gets broken and has to be spliced again. So all of this is great metaphor, and it solves the problem, because clearly what is new is not the thread. What's new is the pattern. The pattern is new. And so that as soon as I come on that part of the metaphor, suddenly things become clear to me. But then Vygotsky's voice says, what are the limits of this metaphor? And they are many.